a man stands silently blocking traffic. Many would assume they're mentally ill or perhaps part of a protest of some sort. But what happens when they're arrested and yet again do not speak? They do not speak to the police, the lawyers, the judges. Their silence becomes deafening.
What you are about to hear is believed to be real, based on witness accounts, testimonies, and public record. This is terrifying and true.
Over here in the United States of America, you often hear, "You have the right to remain silent." That is a special right here in America that doesn't exist quite the same in any other nation. But, generally speaking, your right to remain silent allows you to keep from incriminating yourself. But over in the United Kingdom, they don't have such a law, which is truly ironic, because as we're about to find out, a gentleman named David Hampson is about to push the limits of just how much silence can have an effect, not just on your community, but on the legal system. We're telling that story after this. In the heart of Swansea, South Wales, an unsettling figure began to surface with disturbing regularity. For 4 consecutive years, a man stood silently in the middle of a busy road, obstructing traffic, ignoring frustrated drivers, and offering no explanation. He never spoke, never resisted arrest, and never revealed his motive. Despite multiple detentions, his eerie silence never wavered. Nicknamed the Silent Man, David Hampson became a mystery that neither police officers, lawyers, nor doctors could unravel. Each encounter ended the same way, with Hampson refusing to say a word, even as courtrooms demanded answers and psychiatrists searched for signs of illness or intent. His refusal to cooperate turned a seemingly simple offense into one of the most baffling cases to pass through the United Kingdom's legal system. What drove this man to stand still in defiance of law and logic? Was he protesting something unseen, or was it an act without meaning at all? The mystery of David Hampson challenges not only the rules of justice, but the very nature of silence itself. David Hampson, also known as the Silent Man, is a United Kingdom citizen believed to have been born around 1970 or 1971. Despite multiple legal encounters spanning years, almost nothing is known about his early life. There's no available information about his family, education, employment, or personal interests. No relatives or friends have come forward, and no one has spoken publicly about knowing him. This deep lack of background information is not just unusual, it's nearly unprecedented in cases with repeated legal intervention. His complete silence has prevented any understanding of the person behind the name. Because Hampson has never spoken, not even to confirm his identity, the only concrete information available comes from his actions. Between 2014 and 2018, and again after his release from prison in 2021, he committed the same peculiar offense. Nothing else is known about him. Not his past, his beliefs, or his intentions. Everything that is recorded about David Hampson begins and ends with a single repeated act that brought him into conflict with the law. His silence has become the defining trait that earned him his moniker, the Silent Man. Over the years, Hampson was regularly found in the middle of the road, deliberately blocking traffic. Police officers were frequently called to the scene and noted that he made no attempt to leave or resist arrest. In fact, it often seemed as though he was waiting for them to arrive. There was no shouting, no resistance, no reaction, only silence. According to law enforcement, his behavior gave the impression of someone intentionally placing himself in legal jeopardy, though no one could explain why. Each time Hampson was arrested and later released, he returned to the exact same spot, the middle of De La Becce Street in Swansea. This location is just a few yards from the Swansea Central Police Station. He would stand in the road and block the traffic again, repeating the same act that had previously landed him in custody. This cycle of silent offense, arrest, release, and return became a bizarre routine that no one, not even legal experts, could fully comprehend. Throughout court proceedings, Hampson remained entirely mute. He never offered a defense, never responded to questions, and never acknowledged the process unfolding around him. Often staring blankly at the floor, he gave no indication of emotion or intent. His refusal to communicate made the case exceptionally difficult for judges, attorneys, and law enforcement officers, many of whom expressed frustration over the legal challenges caused by his silence. The court was left without any means to understand his perspective or determine a motive. As of today, David Hampson continues to embody the identity of the Silent Man. His repeated actions, total lack of explanation, and complete silence have created one of the most puzzling cases in modern British legal history. Without a single word spoken, he has baffled authorities, evaded psychological profiling, and left behind nothing but questions. His motive remains unknown. His identity remains unverified, and his story remains shrouded in silence. In 2014, David Hampson's actions were initially viewed as more of an inconvenience than a serious offense. At that time, he was charged with 4 counts of intentionally obstructing free passage along a public highway. The court imposed a 2-year conditional discharge, signaling that the law viewed his behavior as disruptive, but not particularly dangerous. Throughout the proceedings, Hampson maintained complete silence, refusing to answer questions or explain his conduct in any way. His quiet demeanor remained consistent, even as legal measures began to escalate. The very next year, in 2015, Hampson once again returned to the same behavior. This time, he was convicted of a public nuisance offense, after again deliberately blocking traffic. The court responded by issuing his first criminal behavior order, intended to prevent further incidents. But the order did nothing to deter him. His silence persisted, and his actions showed no sign of stopping. Despite the legal warning, Hampson continued to reappear in the same location, performing the same act as though he was unfazed by the consequences. In 2016, after breaching the terms of the criminal behavior order, Hampson received a custodial sentence. He was again arrested, again brought before the court, and again remained silent throughout the process. The pattern continued in 2017, when another breach of the same court order led to another conviction and additional jail time. Hampson's refusal to comply with legal restrictions, or even acknowledge them, made him a unique challenge for the justice system. His silence remained unbroken in every courtroom appearance. In 2018, authorities had grown increasingly frustrated with his repeated offenses and lack of communication. After yet another incident of blocking traffic, Hampson was sentenced to 42 months in prison. Yet even during incarceration, he demonstrated troubling and puzzling behavior. He reportedly barricaded himself inside his cell and proceeded to set fire to his mattress, further complicating efforts to attempt to understand his mental state or motivations. Despite multiple attempts to assess him, his silence remained absolute. No one, not prison staff, legal experts, nor psychologists, could determine what exactly he was trying to achieve. After serving more than 3 years in prison, many assumed Hampson would finally stop his disruptive actions, but that assumption proved to be wrong. On December 3rd, 2021, now 51 years old, he returned once more to De La Becce Street. In a scene identical to his past offenses, he stood in the middle of the busy road, once again obstructing traffic just steps away from Swansea Central Police Station. The act was a clear repetition of the behavior that had led to multiple arrests prior, as well as court orders and his aforementioned prison time. David Hampson was arrested once again after blocking traffic at the junction of Mount Pleasant and De La Becce Street. His actions mirrored the same pattern he had followed for years. Following his arrest, authorities initially detained him under the Mental Health Act. Once officers were able to confirm his identity using a driver's license found in his possession, Hampson was formally arrested for breaching his existing criminal behavior order. When cautioned by police, Hampson offered no response. He remained, of course, completely silent, giving no acknowledgement or indication that he had even heard the charges being read. The following day, when he appeared at Swansea Magistrates' Court, his silence continued. As with all previous court appearances, he chose not to speak, and the case was quickly referred to Swansea Crown Court for trial. Despite facing serious charges, Hampson neither addressed the court nor reacted to the proceedings in any visible way. During his Crown Court appearance, Hampson was formally charged with obstructing the highway. However, he once again refused to speak or acknowledge the court in any capacity. Because he did not enter a plea to the charge, the court recorded a plea of not guilty on his behalf, as is standard procedure in such unusual situations. He was then granted bail pending trial. Immediately after leaving the courtroom, Hampson returned to the same street where he had been arrested, De La Becce Street, and resumed his disruptive behavior by standing in the middle of the road once again. Predictably, this led to another arrest. He was taken back into custody and charged with the same offense, and remanded ahead of his next trial. His refusal to communicate continued to present serious challenges for the court. On May 13, 2022, Hampson appeared before the higher court, and once again did not respond when asked to enter a plea. The court, following protocol, recorded another not guilty plea on his behalf. The case was scheduled to proceed to trial in July, but first, the court needed to resolve a crucial legal question regarding his silence. Before the jury could consider the main charge of obstructing the highway, they were asked to determine the nature of Hampson's silence. The legal system had to decide whether he was mute of malice, or choosing not to speak, as opposed to mute by visitation of God, meaning he was physically or mentally incapable of speech. This distinction would impact how the trial was handled and how responsibility would be assigned. The burden of answering that question fell on a group of jurors who had to assess evidence related to Hampton's ability to speak. To support their decision, jurors were presented with testimony from prison officers at HMP Swansea. These officers stated that Hampton had, in fact, spoken to them during his time in custody, which strongly indicated that his silence in court was a deliberate choice. Based on this evidence, the jury concluded that Hampson was mute of malice, silent by his own decision, rather than due to any kind of incapacity. Following the jury's findings, the presiding judge ordered a psychiatric report be prepared on David Hampson. The court hoped that this evaluation might provide some clarity regarding his behavior and possibly identify avenues of support or treatment that could be offered to him. However, just as he had done with law enforcement and the courts, Hampson refused to cooperate with the psychiatrist. He declined to engage in any form of conversation with the court-appointed doctor, which made it impossible for an in-person assessment to be carried out. Faced with Hampson's refusal to participate, the court authorized the release of his medical records so the psychiatrist could assess some form of background information. This step was taken to assist in generating a report that might at least provide a partial understanding of Hampson's psychological state, his past, and any potential contributing factors to his continued silence and disruptive behavior. With direct insight from Hampson unavailable, the doctor had no choice but to rely on what little information was available from the existing records. When the case returned to court in August, the psychiatric report was presented. According to the doctor, Hampson's silence was both selective and deliberate. The physician further suggested that there might be underlying social or financial pressures that played a role in his ongoing refusal to speak. However, despite these possible external stressors, the psychiatrist concluded that Hampton did not suffer from any diagnosable psychiatric or medical condition. As a result, a hospital order which would have mandated treatment instead of prison time was not deemed appropriate. With no medical or psychological explanation for Hampson's silence, the court was left to interpret his behavior in other ways. Judge Hugh Reese, presiding over the hearing, acknowledged the possibility that social stresses could be influencing Hampson's conduct. Still, he ultimately dismissed that notion as insufficient justification. The judge expressed a strong opinion that Hampson's persistent silence was less about hardship and more about what he described as breathtaking arrogance and insolence. Throughout the proceedings, Hampson remained unmoved. He continued to demonstrate no willingness to explain his actions or provide any insight into his motivations. His repeated defiance of court orders, coupled with his deliberate silence, left the justice system with little recourse but to treat the matter as a serious breach of public order. The judge's frustration was evident as he addressed the court, making it clear that Hampson's behavior could no longer be tolerated as harmless or eccentric. As a result of his actions and continued disregard for the court, David Hampson, who had no fixed abode, was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. The court's decision was not only a response to his latest offense, but also a culmination of years of repeated violations, silence, and disregard for legal authority. Despite all the time that had passed since his first known offense, the man known as the Silent Man remained an enigma. Silent, stubborn, and utterly unreadable. In the end, David Hampson's silent acts of disruption left a trail of confusion and frustration. Though he was repeatedly arrested and brought to trial, the true reasons behind his actions still remain shrouded in his silence. The courts, the police, and even the psychiatric professionals were unable to fully understand the motives of this silent man. The impact of his behavior rippled through the legal system, leaving everyone who encountered him, from investigators, officers, and court officials, haunted by his unyielding silence. His refusal to speak, even when faced with the consequences of his actions, challenged the very nature of law and justice. As Hampson continued to live in silence, refusing to offer an explanation or even acknowledge his own involvement, the world was left to wonder. What drives a person to such extreme defiance? And can true silence ever truly be understood? Or is it simply a barrier that cannot be broken? Terrifying and True is narrated by Enrique Couto. It's executive produced by Rob Fields, Mark Shields, and Bobbletopia.com. And produced by Dan Wilder, with original theme music by Ray Mattis. If you have a story you think we should cover on Terrifying and True, send us an email at weeklyspooky@gmail.com. And if you want to support us for as little as $1 a month, go to weeklyspooky.com/join. Your support for as little as $1 a month keeps the show going. And speaking of, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters, folks who pay a little bit more to hear their name at the end of the show. And they are Kate and Lulu, Jessica Fuller, Johnny Nix, Jenny Green, Amber Hansford, Brent McCullough, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. Thank you all so much, and thank you for listening. We'll see you all right here next time on Terrifying and True.